The following program is a UWTV classic.
Hazel Wolf, environmental activist, turns 100, next on Upon Reflection.
From the University of Washington in Seattle, Upon Reflection.
I'm Ross Reynolds. Welcome to Upon Reflection. Hazel Wolf is turning 100, but she's still a political and environmental activist. Her base is the Seattle Audubon Society, where she's been the secretary for 31 years. She founded more than 21 Audubon chapters in Washington state. She actively lobbies Capitol Hill, edits an outdoor publication, and speaks to school children about nature. Her causes have included nuclear waste, labor, and environmental protection in Nicaragua. Hazel Wolf, thanks very much for being with us on Upon Reflection.
It's very nice to be here.
You were born March 10th, 1898 in Victoria, British Columbia, with an American flag on your crib. Why was that, an American flag on your crib?
Well, my mother was an American, and she didn't like the idea of her child being born in a foreign country. So she had them put the flag up over the bed.
You were a teenager when World War I rolled around. Do you have many memories of that?
Oh, yes, I do. Mm-hmm. I was about 16, I think. The war broke out in 1914, and I was 16 years old. So it hung like a cloud over my head, for the 4 years.
Immediately following the war, there's a bit of history that I think is largely forgotten today, but there was a flu epidemic, an influenza epidemic that
Yes.
swept the world in 1919. Did that affect your life at all, the people you were with?
Well, I got the flu, and my whole family did. My mother nursed a whole bunch of us. She didn't get it, and we all survived. But I think 2 million people died.
Millions of people died from that influenza in 1919.
So of course, most of them survived.
Mm-hmm. Tell us how you got involved in environmental activism, or environmentalism at all.
Oh, well, it was not until I was in my early 60s. I was always very fond of the outdoors, and I liked to hike. And I had a companion who belonged to the Audubon Society. She was always trying to get me to join what I call that bunch of bird watchers. And finally, to quiet her down, I said, okay, here's my money. Now, don't bother me anymore. Well, of course, she did. She got me to go on a field trip with other members of the Audubon Society. And they were all looking at the same little bird. It was about 5 inches long, including his tail, maybe 6. It was going up the tree, picking as it went, little invisible things, but I assumed it was eating. When it got to the first lateral branch, it went down to the bottom of the next tree and did the same thing. Evidently, all day long, it picked some little thing off these trees. And it occurred to me, that little bird works hard for a living. It really does. So do I. And they told me it never went down the tree, always up. And I also concluded it has a special lifestyle. It always goes up the tree. And I have a special lifestyle too. I get up in the morning, eat my breakfast, go to work all afternoon, go home. I have a lifestyle. I never get up at 3 o'clock in the morning to go to work. And so I related to that little bird. And then it occurred to me, that's what Audubon's all about, to protect little birds like this.
Well, that comes in a period of your life after you had done a number of different, very interesting things. Mm-hmm. Could you talk a little bit about what you were doing in the 1930s around the Depression and your work with the WPA?
I was on welfare during the Depression. And let's see, WPA, that's the Works Progress Administration?
Yes, set up by Roosevelt to help people out.
I was on welfare, and when this program came in, then I was assigned to various projects, and I worked quite a number of them. There was one in the city hall where they were evaluating property for tax purposes. That wasn't very exciting, but it was very important.
Mm-hmm.
The one I liked best was when I was secretary to the Federal Theater, director of the Federal Theater.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a very, very interesting one. And I saw a lot of old plays and a lot of new ones, some that were right on target. You have to have a place to live was one of them. Another play was Spirochete, that was a history of syphilis and how the cure was found. And they had a special program for African Americans, and they created their own plays. I remember one was based on the poems of, what's his name?
Langston Hughes?
No, I don't remember his name. John Paul. I can't remember his name, but it was based on his poems.
Mm-hmm. Now, you did some work in the labor movement also around that time period, didn't you?
Yes, that was during the 30s.
Mm-hmm.
I did quite a bit of organizing, and I was a member of the Communist Party. And as a member, we looked around for opportunities to organize the people. It was necessary because of the suffering that the people endured. It bit deep into the middle class, too. Much deeper than anything we've had since.
What attracted you to the Communist Party during the Depression?
Well, I think my first encounter was at the zone office, where we went every Friday or whatever it was to pick up our food voucher. And there was a young man with a petition standing outside, and I like petitions. So I went over to see it, and it was a petition addressed to the state legislature advising them to set up unemployment insurance, which was something that no one had ever heard of. And I said to him, "Why, that's a wonderful idea." The petition also had a clause that they would obtain the money to fund this program by shutting down the state militia. And I said, "That's no way. You'll never get it that way. That's the only thing that holds this silly system together."
Mm-hmm.
Who cooked up this petition? He said, "The Communist Party." I said, "Oh, I didn't know they had one in the United States. I thought that was in Russia." "Oh, they're every place." Oh, I was interested. So they said, "Come to a meeting. There would have a little study group." So I went to the meeting, and lo and behold, they were evicting the people at the place where we were supposed to have the meeting.
Evicting them out of their homes?
Yeah. They're bringing their furniture out the front door and putting it on the sidewalk. So we picked it up and took it and put it in the back door. And this went on for a while, and I don't think the sheriff's heart was in it, really, and he said, "Phew." He walked off and left us. And we put everything back in place and went on with our study group. And among other things, they handed out copies of the Communist Manifesto. It's a very small pamphlet. I still have it. But there wasn't anything in there that I didn't already know. I'd experienced through my life and the influence of my philosophy of my parents and one thing and another. I knew everything in that pamphlet.
What are some of the things in there that you knew about firsthand?
Well, that there was a class struggle, that there was a ruling class and the working class, and that we were opposed to each other. And the struggle is the history of the class struggle. And I could understand that. And when I say there was nothing in there I didn't know, but I had never seen it put together like that in a logical way. It was all sort of more like intuition than it was thought out.
Of course, the American Communist Party was marginalized in this country in the 30s and 40s, and certainly after World War II. In your experience in working with the Communist Party, what was it able to accomplish? Was it able to do some things?
Oh, yes. We did lots of things for people. organizing the unemployed was one of the things we did. We would demonstrate for more food, for shelter, for wood, for stoves. We're very active on behalf of people who, like ourselves, needed these things for survival.
Did you at some point along the line decide to leave the party?
No, I didn't decide to leave. I sort of drifted away. The reason being, when the Second World War broke out, the Depression was over. They never did solve the Depression. It was a war that bailed us out. And so the Communist Party kept on meeting, talking philosophy, raising money, but there was no activity. And I found that boring. I really did. And I went to fewer and fewer meetings. Mm-hmm. So I sort of drifted away. But I never lost my respect and belief in the things that they stood for.
Did you find another place to put your activity, your action, right after the Communist Party?
Yes, I did. I earned my living as a legal secretary. And my last job was with a civil rights attorney, John Coughlin. Mm-hmm. Have you heard of him?
Yes.
He was a very courageous attorney, the only one that had courage enough to defend people who were accused of being communists. And first thing I knew, I was one of the victims because they were going to deport me for my membership.
And that was quite a long, drawn-out procedure, wasn't it? They tried to deport you over 16 years.
And John, I said that I've worked for John, and he said he worked for me. And we still argue about it. Anyway, we lost all the battles, but we won the war. So often happens in America. I really think it was the people that put an end to the McCarthy period. Mm-hmm. They became outraged when they realized what was going on.
Do you think that something like the McCarthy period could happen again in this country? It's often held up as an example of what we shouldn't be doing in this country, persecuting people for their political beliefs, and some people feel as the lesson's been learned, it couldn't recur. What do you think?
Well, I doubt it, but I wouldn't say for sure. Mm. You never know what's coming up over the horizon. You never know. But I would be out there fighting against it, I imagine. Mm-hmm. Lots of people would be.
Well, you got involved in the Audubon Society, and your activities also spread into other environmental areas, mm-hmm. aside from working directly with the Audubon Society. What other environmental areas got your interest?
Oh, you mean other than environmental areas?
No, other environmental areas aside from direct Audubon work.
Well, I was president for a couple of years of the Federation of Western Outdoor Clubs. Mm-hmm. I still edit their publication known as Outdoors West. And that's Federation of Environmental Clubs in the West and in British Columbia. And when I was president of that federation, I think I did one of the most valuable things that I ever did do.
What was that?
I started a conference between the environmentalists and the leaders of the Native Americans. That was about 1978, 79. And the Friends, or I guess the Quakers, the Friends organization of the Quakers, they funded us for $5,000, and we had a full-time staff person. And I visited in my old automobile every tribe in the state of Washington, and some of them in British Columbia, and told them what our concerns were, and I learned what theirs were, and I found out what I already suspected, that we were both interested in the same things, care of Mother Earth.
I was going to say, that sounds almost like a natural combination of environmentalists and Native Americans. That sense of stewardship is very similar between the two groups.
That's right, their attitude toward the earth.
Mm-hmm.
And their caring for the earth. It was a very successful conference. All of the larger tribes came, and all of the environmental tribes came. Some of the little ones couldn't afford to be. Had it here in Seattle at the Daybreak Star. And it was very successful. We never had another one. We would always work with the tribes now, sometimes to help them, sometimes to join them in the common project. And it just goes on.
Mm-hmm. Taking the broad view, I wonder, you've seen the environmental movement grow and increase and become more of a political force in this country, but at the same time there are many more attacks on the environment than there were 20 or 30 or 40 years ago, with more automobiles out there, more growth, a larger population. Do you think that we're getting a handle on improving the environment?
It's spotty. Some places we are. We're deeply involved in saving wetlands, and we have saved a lot of them. Seattle Audubon had what they call the wet net. I call them the nitwits.
The nitwits?
The nitwits. They've done a tremendous job for Seattle Audubon, and finally it was turned over to the state Audubon because it became statewide. That was one of our good achievements, I thought. And we've taken a lot of interest in preserving ancient forests. And there, of course, we're head on to the timber people. I'd like to talk about the salmon for a bit.
Which is a very big issue.
It is a big issue.
In 1998.
It's complex.
As more and more species of salmon are declared endangered, and particularly in populated areas like Puget Sound, like the Seattle area, it appears as though it's going to have a much stronger impact on the lives of many people in the urban area.
That's right. And it's a very complex situation. It's not a simple thing. Dams are responsible for a lot of it. It bars access to the upstream beds. Clear-cutting forests in the watersheds also is part of it. Water pollution is another part. Overfishing is another part. So it's a very complex thing with no single thing. You've got to fight on all fronts.
Do you think that individuals who, in some ways, are the ones who will make the final choices, are willing to do things like pay higher electric rates, not do as much sport fishing as they would have liked to, pay more for wild salmon, do the kind of sacrifices that we're being told may be necessary to preserve the wild salmon? I mean, there's certain things that government can do, but then there are also many individual choices that will inform government and make up their minds about how to react to this endangered salmon.
I think they will if they learn about it. And that's our job, is to educate every way we can to raise the consciousness of the people, because they will struggle against it if they are aware that they can make some difference in doing that.
You were very active and involved in the movement among Americans to draw attention to the war in Nicaragua, and you traveled to Nicaragua a couple or 3 times, didn't you?
5 times, yeah.
What attracted you to that cause? And tell us about your work there.
Well, I learned about Nicaragua at the University of Washington. They had a big meeting in Kane Hall, and several people spoke who had been in Nicaragua. One of them talked about how they had banned the use of DDT and how they had nationalized the forests, put all the timber companies out. They nationalized insurance and banking, even beer, room temperature.
It was the National Beer Company?
National Beer Company. And that attracted me. And they had a universal health program. Mm-hmm. They had free education up to the university level. Many things about Nicaragua I liked very much. And I had an opportunity to go on an environmental tour, and we visited all over the country, saw how they were rehabilitating the forests, restoring the streams. They were not building dams, big ones, they drew little ones that would supply a small population, a little village or something like that. They use wind power and thermal power. I like that country very much. I felt at home there. For the first time in my life, I felt I was in a country that was on my side.
How did they receive you in Nicaragua? How were you greeted?
Oh, that is, well, it's understandable. They never held it against the American people. We were treated with respect every place we went. It was our government, but they never felt that way about the American people.
Your work with the Audubon Society involves a lot of work talking to children about the environment. Could you tell us a little bit about that work? How do you engage little kids when you come to talk to them about the environment?
Well, I have to say something that they can relate to right off. For instance, I was speaking to a group of young people that were called Youth at Risk, which is a euphemism for having had a brush with the law. How am I going to relate to them? So I told them that when I was young, I was quite an athlete. I could run 100 yards in 11 seconds. That's pretty fast. I said there wasn't a cop on the beat that could catch me. From then on, it was
So you got their attention.
Even with prisoners. I spoke to the prisoners at Monroe, and how am I going to get through those prisoners? So I told them about Nicaragua, that I'd been invited to go to another place, Metagawa. And they invited the chief of police to come there and cut the ribbon. They were opening in a women's center there. And she was the head of the police. She spoke English. I was introduced to her. And she leaned over and kissed me. And you know, that was the first time I was ever kissed by a cop. That took care of them. So I always try to think of something that engages their one time I really had a lot of fun. It was an assembly, and there were preschoolers in the front row, and then the older ones were in the back. And how can you talk to that different age branch, you know? And so I told them when I started, I spoke to the young ones in the front. I said, you know, this is going to be kind of boring to you, because I didn't know I was going to be speaking to such young children. So, you know, if you get bored, just quietly go home. And I'll check in with you from time to time. If you can stick it out, it's more interesting in the end because I have some slides. Okay, so I start. And in about a minute, I said, how are you getting along down there? Okay? Okay, nobody wants to go home. Nobody went home. And the teacher said she never saw them. I suppose they were hoping I'd do some other funny thing. Besides tell them to go home in the middle of the day.
Well, I was surprised to read that at 100 years old, you were a chain smoker at one time in your life, but you actually attribute your longevity in part to having been a chain smoker.
I'm glad to tell that story. I started to smoke when I was 18, at a time when there was no discussion of the effect it would have on your health. It was a moral issue. Girls didn't smoke. That was a signal for me to light up, you can imagine. So I started at a time when I had no idea that it would affect my health. And when I was in the 50s, I was addicted, and I knew then that it was dangerous, but I couldn't stop. And I came down with tuberculosis. Of course, that wasn't because I smoked. Tuberculosis is some kind of an infection. And they can't smoke in a sanitarium. And when I came out of there, I was not smoking. And I haven't smoked to this day, and I'm sure I wouldn't be here talking to you if I hadn't had tuberculosis.
Now, what other, I'm sure not many people are going to want to go get tuberculosis in order to, to stop smoking, but what other things have you done consciously in your life to prolong it? Do you have a special diet? Do you have special habits, work habits?
Not focused that way, but I think that the way I live probably does have something to do with it. But I do it for all the wrong reasons. I hate to cook. And I'm kind of poor. I live on Social Security. So I don't buy packaged or frozen or canned. That's expensive. I don't buy meat. I'm not a vegetarian. But I read a book one time by Robbins is his name, A Diet for a New America. Tells you how they treat the animals that we eat. And I thought, I'll never, ever buy meat again. And I never have. But I don't think it had any effect on my health. So I'm down to vegetables in season and fruit. Even dessert, I eat a grapefruit because I don't have to cook it. So for all the wrong reasons, I probably have a pretty good diet. Do you think so?
I think so, yeah. I think that's naturally a good diet.
But it is for the wrong reasons. It's because I don't like to cook.
What do you tell other people about things that they should think about as they get older? I mean, what advice do you have for people? Probably many people in my generation, many more than in your generation, are going to reach the age of 100. How do you keep it lively for yourself? How do you keep active? How do you get beyond the fact that perhaps many of your contemporaries are long gone by the time, and you're still around?
Well, as for those who are long gone, there are a lot of them coming up, too. As old friends die away, young friends come in. I have hundreds and hundreds of grandchildren in the city of Seattle that come when I want some help on anything. I wonder if you would rephrase that question again at the beginning. I started to answer toward the end of it, but you remember what you said?
Yes. What do you tell people about getting older to make that part of their lives still vibrant and important?
I think getting away from yourself, the further away you get from yourself, the better. And getting involved in other people's problems, helping them solve them. You can't worry about two things at once. Or getting in a community activity that keeps you away from dwelling on every little ache and pain that you get. I think that has a lot to do with it, getting away from yourself into the community, either on an individual basis or on a community basis. Does that make sense? That
makes perfect sense. And that's a great piece of advice to leave us with. Hazel Wolf, environmental activist, I really appreciate you taking the time to join us today on Upon Reflection. Thank you.
You're welcome.
To see more UWTV classics, visit uwtv.org/classics.